Thanks for joining us for an episode of the Awe and Wonder podcast from the Special Education Technology Center. We're so excited today to have our special guest, Michele Bishop. So we'll let Michele introduce herself in a minute. I'm Sarah Kinsella.
And I'm Brenda Del Monte. Michele, why don't you introduce yourself to the few people who may not know who you are?
Well, hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Michele Bishop, and I have a little bit of a background in, I'm a special ed teacher, first and foremost, and sort of like through everything, no matter technically what I'm doing or not doing, I'm still a teacher. And I have an AAC and access kind of background heavily in terms of the kinds of kids I've worked with in the past. And I'm now working a lot with power mobility and access and integrating all of that stuff to, their communication devices and their computers and their phones and their iPads and all those kinds of things. So I've sort of evolved through starting out as a special ed teacher, and then, access and technology has kind of been the thread that held me as I moved and changed in terms of my roles with these kids. So.
When did you start special ed teaching?
A long time ago.
Are you over 20, over 30, something over 20 years ago, over 30 years ago?
My first teaching job was 1984.
Okay. So approaching 40 years ago. So the field has changed so much. It's so fun to talk to you about how all of that's happened.
My first classroom had, I was fancy that my first classroom had not one, but two Apple computers that used the actual floppy disk. So the 5 1/4, they flopped, right?
The real flop.
And then I got an Apple IIe that used the 3.5, right?
Right.
But I had an Echo speech synthesizer, which all of you folks probably don't even have a clue.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But it was a little box, and it had those wide sort of tape cables back in the day. They were called a serial cable, and they were really flat and wide and long. And they plugged into the back of the computer, and it was a speaker, but it was a speech synthesizer, and it allowed text to speech.
Wow.
And it was the first thing that you could get speech coming out from the computer. And so it was called an Echo speech synthesizer. And that would sit on top of the monitor or somewhere where the sound, it had a little volume knob on it. So I had one of those. And
wow.
So
you had people coming to see your classroom. You were like,
well, I was in Southern Oregon, and there's not a lot of folks traveling down there to see, but I was new, and I was young, and I was idealistic, and I was going to change the world, and these kids were, going to do amazing things. And so, I was lucky. I didn't know it at the time, but I was lucky. I look back and know that having computers in my classroom was rare.
Right.
And I had a classroom of a very mixed bag. We, back in the day, we had really bad names for how we categorized folks. And so I had a very multi diagnosis driven core classroom, but they were all kids who had certainly some level of cognitive delays or deficits, as well as motor. Now, I mean, I say that with because I had one lovely young man who was Down syndrome, and he was the sweetest thing ever, and another young man who had CP but walked and talked, but he had some internal rotation in his hip, and he had a bit of that CP speech, but you could understand him perfectly fine. And those were the first two kids that I had that graduated high school. It was like, look at me, I'm like, awesome. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, but yes. So those guys were in my class, but then I also had a young kid on the spectrum. I had 3 kids in wheelchairs who were non-speaking. I had another young woman who had, kind of a mishmash of, a long list of things, but nothing won. But she was deaf and blind, as well as a severe seizure disorder. And, and so I had a kid who had a growth disorder, and he was giant. I mean, giant. A very rare disorder, and the only one in the country who didn't speak. So, but so the majority of my class didn't talk, with the exception of my two guys, Stan and Charles, who did.
Right.
But so that stuff became a big thing, like I just had to figure it out. And I sort of joke when I get around, old folks at conferences and go, remember the board maker symbols binders, that there were two of them, and they were like 3 or 4 inch binders, and you would open them up and peel and make copies of them, and then you cut them and you glued them on your low-tech board for people to, I was like, and I'm in the staff room with my markers coloring them, and so colored because everything was black and white, and the only thing was that they came on different colored paper, like, so you put it on green paper because it was a verb, and you put it on yellow paper because it was a pronoun, and you put it on, you did that kind of thing, but they were just black and white symbols. They didn't have any color to them. And I, shuffled on down to the staff room with my giant binders under my arm to, cut out pictures for all my kids who couldn't talk. And just made it up. I was like, well, they need to be able to tell me this, and they, and I was just guessing and figuring out what language they needed, and have tons of support with that. I had 1 aide, and me, and 8 kids, and
well,
and it was high school. So my strategy was, I instituted a peer tutoring program, and so every period I had 8 high school students in my class, in addition to the 8 kids that I had that were mine. I had 8 TAs, basically, is the only way to figure out how to do it. But they'd sign up for my class, and they'd get assigned a student, and we'd have a week of training about how you worked with kids, and and they ran their program. And each kid had a binder, and they had, things that they did, and, different kinds of activities. And then I had the peer tutors work with them. And then my aide and I could sort of manage them and toilet the ones that needed to be toileted. And I knew the rest of them were busy and engaged, and they were also having the social interaction with these other kids, so that then when they toddled off down to the lunchroom, they had kids to talk to, and they had kids there in the school that watched out for them. And I knew that when I sent, Stan down to the office with the attendants, that if he got distracted and there's somebody'd meander out and go, hey, aren't you supposed to get down to class? I know who you are, and I know where you belong. And, so it just helped build a little bit of independence, but it also, it was a very fun thing. That it was amazing, the kids who were the peer tutors. I'd have teachers come to me and say, have you seen so-and-so? He's, skips my class every day. And I'm like, he's here in mine every day. He's here because his kid is waiting for him.
Right. Yeah. This matters to him. And
yeah. And so he's like, no, somebody's waiting for me in that classroom. I'm there, and I don't ever miss it. But then he's always skipped social studies or something. And that teacher would come to me and go, have you seen so-and-so? And I'd be like, yeah, he was here. Sorry, he was here, and then of course my kids would give him away and go, oh yeah, he was here, and I'd be like,
so did you continue that program for a while?
As long as I was there in that school, I did. I don't know if they did when I left, but yeah, I did it for 4 years, I think. But it was great. I mean, you just had some really interestingly enough, a lot of boys who maybe weren't highly successful in their academic classes, but really somehow, enjoyed coming in and really connecting with these kids. And they were like, my kids would go down to lunch, and the kids who could, I'd send them up to the lunch line, and you'd see him like get up from a table. This is high school, so they had the round tables, and they were all with their friends and stuff. And he'd get up and he'd go over and he'd get in line with one of my kids, and he'd
love that
through the line and send him over, and he goes, he's got everything he needs. And I'm like, thanks.
That's awesome. When I was in high school,
feeding somebody, because
great. You've got,
So
I had that experience on the other end in high school, and there was a student, and we got to know each other at lunch, and he had a notebook, and he would write in it, and I would talk with him. And I think that's so amazing. And you've described a lot of students that you had in that first class. Is there a particular student, maybe in that class or later in your career, that inspired you to kind of do more? Was kind of your
Um,
why?
yeah, you know, I mean, I would say yes, there was certainly a student then, in that first class. And again, you know, you're young and you're like ready to tackle the world and you're going to be the
Mm-hmm.
best forever and they can't live without you. And you have all of that baggage that it's not true, but that's okay. But yeah, I had a young man in that classroom who, you know, because you come out of school and you're like, this is what I know and this is what I do. I did my student teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did my student teaching in a really wonderful program, and it gave me a lot of those ideas, and I could carry into my class and kind of just jump in with that group. That was, you know, that was the group of kids I wanted to work with. That's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be a
Mm-hmm.
resource room teacher. That wasn't my interest, but I did at some point do that, but it only
Mm-hmm.
confirmed the fact that wasn't my interest. But I had a kid in this class who he had a growth disorder. It's called Weaver syndrome, and super unusual. But he was really big, and there was an elementary program, and then there was a high school program, and he was really big in the elementary program, but young in the high school program. But they moved
Right.
over because physically he was pretty daunting for like kindergartners.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was taller than I'm 5'10", and he was taller than me, and he was 13.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And you know, he's a big guy, and but he tantrumed and he cried. He was non-speaking, and if he didn't want to do something, he literally would just slowly sit down on the floor and then
Mm-hmm.
cry, and there's snot running, and he's got tears, and he's you know, and he's mad,
Mm-hmm.
not leaving the gym, or he's not leaving the cafeteria, or he's whatever. And he was, you
Right.
know, and he had this behavior, and they had lots of behavior plans and lots of these things that he came with. And my issue was that's never going to fly in high school. We've got kids changing classes, and you can't sit down in the hallway and then
Right.
have class change and have all these high school kids, you know, while you're pitching a fit and crying and snots.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it was dramatic, you know, and it was
Mm-hmm.
loud. It was loud because, of course, they put me in where all special ed classrooms certainly were, and probably still are, in the industrial arts wing. So it was
Mm-hmm.
very echoey, and, you know, concrete floors, and, you know, so my whole priority was we can't do this. Like
Right.
this is never going to fly. And I'm there saying, no, we need to have this program at high school. These kids are going to be great. This is, you know, I'm going to have these peer blah, 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 blah. And they're all like, okay. And then you've got this one, and teachers going, I know,
Yeah.
we've never had these kids at our school before. And so my whole focus for his program, if you want to call it a program, because I was like, I don't care if we do anything, I don't care. This is the one and only thing we are trying to fix right now, is that you
Mm-hmm.
cannot cry. This can't be the way you do this. And so I basically just, and he's, you know, he understood you. He was a smart guy. I mean, he certainly had cognitive challenges and things, but he, you know, like you could talk to him and say, we can't cry in the hallway. And he'd be like, yeah. And he could sign a little bit. And then of course I'd say, okay, we're leaving the gym. It's PE's over. And you know, and cry. And I'm like, remember we said we can't cry? And he's like, you know. So I basically made this deal with him, and I taught him, because he signed, and I
Mm-hmm.
taught him 5 more minutes. So he could say 5 more minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I said to him, we have to go, it's time to go, we're done with PE, because he loved the gym, he loved PE, he loved to watch them, loved to watch the kids play. He would always, I mean, APE was just a nightmare to get him out of there, or out of the cafeteria at lunch, or out of the cafeteria or the hallways at break, because he liked to watch them all, and then they'd all go, and then he'd be mad, and
Oh.
class, and he'd be like, oh, no, you know, and cry and sit down, and he's too big to pick up. He's too big to, like, we're going.
Mm-hmm.
So I taught him 5 more minutes and said, if you tell me that, we will stay here. But you can't cry. If you cry, all bets were out, right? Like I could do anything about it, but I acted like I could pick him up and take him. And he was like, okay. So we'd get to the gym and we'd be like, it's time to go. Remember, if you have something to tell me, but you can't cry. And he would go, okay, all right, we'll sit here for 5 minutes. So we'd sit there and then I'd say, okay, it's time to go. And he'd go, and I'd be like, and I'd let him do it like twice. And then I go, okay, this is the last one. You have to agree last time. And then you have to come with me. And he'd say, okay. And so then he'd do it and we'd wait the 5 minutes and then he'd get up and walk to class. And so over time, he just didn't cry anymore. And he would say 5 more minutes. And I could say, you know what, this time we're not going to be able to do 5 more minutes. So time when we go to gym, we're not going to, because we have to get back here because so-and-so's coming for music. And he'd be like, okay. And so then at the end, I'd say, remember, we have music, so we can't do 5 more minutes. And he'd be like, okay. But he was the kid that really helped me sort of cement that whole behavior is communication. And we like really get down to like I said, he had star charts and all kinds of crap that he came with that clearly he was still crying and screaming.
It didn't matter for him.
But you had to be willing to sort of go, I'm foregoing reading and I'm foregoing math and I'm foregoing following directions and I'm foregoing all those things because this is bigger in the moment. And once I can get down, then we can get back to the other stuff. But you have to be willing. And then you had to be willing to say, we'll sit here for 5 more minutes. And then when he did it again, we'll sit here for 5 more. And then you had to, I learned very quickly that I had to put a cap on how many 5 more minutes we were going to do. But once I got him to talk to me, then
you scaffolded.
Negotiate, right? But you can't negotiate with a crying child.
Right.
There's so many things I love about that story. One is that you're going to work on what matters. And this is what I know about you, Michele. You're going to work on what matters. You're not tied to the 90. I think you were the one that told me you had an IEP one time that came with 90 goals. I mean, you're not playing that game. Like you just aren't. And it sounds like you never have. If this was year one, this story, like I think you were born this way. But I love giving permission for special ed teachers right now to go, if I could change one thing that would really impact the way people perceive this student, which is huge, the way others treat this student. If I could make one change on the but student, and I mean that, be like you're saying, well, everything was working, but this kid, right? This kid is, and by the way, he's probably acting
classroom.
What did you say?
He derailed the whole classroom.
Yeah.
In that you had this kid who is in your classroom having a crying, moment, and no one else can function either because that's happening. And so,
yeah. So what I was going to say was there's a little bit of, there's no crying in baseball, right? Like you're just like, hey, we don't do that here. So for me, none of the behavior things are working, right? Because what you're not doing is giving him a voice in this. And you're not giving him an opportunity to have a voice and honor the voice. So he could say no and he'd have a voice, but you can't honor that because he has to move. He got to get out of the hallway. By the way, if you've ever been, even as your grown adult self right now, walking through passing time in high school, you could go down. I mean, and if you're already down, you certainly aren't going to get back up. So, I mean, the hallways in high school are the scariest places to try to navigate. So the fact that you were like, okay, I'm going to give him a voice and I'm going to give him words that I can honor. Right. And then we build rapport because he uses words and I honor it. And then he trusts me. That I'm going to believe him when he communicates and that I'm going to honor what he has to say, which means that's more powerful than my behavior.
Yeah. Right. And that's really my whole purpose was to get him to a place where we can come to some agreement, right? But you can't have an agreement between two people who aren't equal, right? And so
Right.
like that's not a fair agreement. Like I have all the power. I mean, this day and age, I have all the power, and and he had been in an elementary environment where it's very much I'm the adult and you're the child, and
Yeah.
now in a high school environment, and he's not very old. I mean, he's 13, he's still young, but he's big, and those kinds of things were going to work against him. And I think the best part about that whole story was at the point that I left, he was probably the most popular kid in my classroom for people who wanted to come in and work with him. And the girls loved him. So he always had girls. Like boys would pick. It was interesting. Boys would pick these other kids, and at 2 of 1, girls gravitated to him. And I took him swimming once a week, and so my peer tutors came swimming too, and so they got out and they missed
fun.
a couple classes, so they got to go, and we would go swimming down at the Y, and they were all in the pool and with him, and he could walk around and stuff, and it was a really nice sort of evolution of him and how he could have been perceived and how he could have been feared because he was big, and were like, he can't be hurting people, and is he going to hurt somebody? And,
Right.
And he's like this hugging, gentle giant. And we had a program where we then went to an elementary school, in a kindergarten class, no, I think it was first grade, in a first grade class. And now, Brenda's going to laugh at this, but my kids did calendar because, it was at the beginning when calendar was brand and Math Their Way was brand new. Did some of that stuff, and the kindergarten or the first grade teacher was a friend of mine, and so my kids would come. We'd take a bus and we'd go to that school, and my kids would lead their calendar because they knew the routines and not a lot of the where they'd have to go off and make, math equations and stuff with beans, but the calendar part, the days of the week and the patterning and the months and the weather,
right.
and all that kind of stuff that they did. And he'd call on the kids, and he would come in and he'd sit down. And again, he's this big guy, and he'd come in and he'd sit down on the little chair, and we'd have to lower him down because he really couldn't. And so we'd get him down. And the little kids, he'd call him, and they'd come up, and he'd pick him up, and they'd sit on his lap, and then they'd take the pointer and they'd point at the calendar, and he'd go and then he'd take their heads, put his hands on his head, and he'd go and then he'd get off me, and they'd go back. And then he'd pick somebody else, and they'd come up and sit, and they'd do their thing, and he'd go, and then he'd kiss their head, and he'd make them leave.
My goodness.
Sweet, and they loved having those kids come in. And so here's this big, giant, gentle guy with these first graders, who just amazing, and they all were really cool kids, and it was just a nice, I don't know, I liked the whole dynamic that my kids were in a role of leading and mentoring, that they learned calendar, and we were on to something else, but they could go and do that, and that was still okay, because they instead of being the students that. So
I mean, it sounds like one of your guiding principles through all of this was how to create a sense of belonging wherever kids are. So they belong in your classroom, they belong with general ed students, they belong as leaders, they're not always followers, and you're creating these opportunities that don't limit their definition, the definition of who they are.
And it highlights what their skills were. My kids were great at it, they all calendar. They didn't need me. I'd just sit back and they do it. And it was like, it was like they weren't learning the days of the week anymore. They knew them all. That wasn't the point of it. The point was to practice for when we went to the elementary school and you got to do calendar with Mrs. So-and-so's class, and how to tell kids that they did a good job, and how to, it put them in a position that amongst their age peers, they weren't the leaders, they were the learners.
Mhm.
But amongst first graders, they knew as much as they did.
Yeah.
Right.
What are other guiding principles that have kind of driven you regardless of the advancement in technology?
Well, it's funny because when I introduced myself, I said technology is the thread that sort of holds everything together that I've done, because I've stayed very involved in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that technology isn't the point.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
my guiding principle, is it's not the technology. While I'm going to bring a whole bunch of technology for you,
Right.
you are the most important thing in the room. You, the teacher, the SLP, whoever the adult is. I don't care what your role is. You're a teacher if you're working with children. So,
Mm-hmm.
you can step aside and be a lofty speech pathologist and not the lowly teacher. But you're all teachers. You're a PT, you're an OT. If you're working with children, you're teaching them. You're teaching them to do things this way. You're teaching them how to stand. You're teaching them how to sit. You're teaching them how to roll over. You're teaching them how to talk. You're teaching them how to find something on a communication device. We're teaching. And if we can't look at a skill, let's just take a skill like literacy. If we can't look at literacy and we can't say, well, they have to know the letters, and they have to know sound syllable correspondence, and they have to be able to sequence sounds, and they have to be able to, recognize, and there's this huge list of skills that are all contained in literacy. If you can't figure out how to teach that without technology, you're not going to teach it with technology. Technology is not the teacher, you are. Technology,
great point.
for me, is the frosting on the cake. Like here I am with somebody, and we're going to learn sight words, because it's at that there was phonics, and then there was sight words, and then it's what the flavor of the week around reading, right? And so I had a student who, we were working on sight words, and so he had flashcards and cards, and he'd come up, and we'd put the cards down, and he'd tell me what they were, and then he'd go back, and then I say, okay, go back and take all your flashcards, and now make a sentence out of there. Like, just make a sentence, because he had enough to make. And then he'd come up and he'd put them up on the whiteboard, right? And I'd go, what does that say? And he'd read it, and then he'd go, and I'd go, I don't know, who's that about? And then he'd go back in his cards, and then he'd put right? And I'd go, it's about you. And he'd be like, yeah. And it's like, if we can't figure out how we need to teach and support kids, and then if I can go, and there's an app that'll let them practice it or reinforce it or gain more independence with it.
Right.
That's
but
great.
not take over the instruction.
But that's not the instruction. So you can't be waiting for the technology or the access to the technology before you teach. Reading or writing or talking or speaking or mathing or anything, right? We can't, it isn't the technology. As like I said, as much as everything about my career is about technology, it isn't about technology.
Yeah.
Right. I love that.
Still teach reading without a computer.
Right.
I love how you say it's the icing on the cake.
Yeah, it's like the frosting, it's the gravy. And I love the gravy. Who doesn't love gravy? Who doesn't love frosting, right? So, access and figuring out switches and figuring out how they're going to get access to a computer is all really wonderful and important. And we do need to do it. But that can't be the gate. We can't be waiting at the gate until somebody figures the gate out.
Right.
Because years go by.
Yeah.
There are students of mine who are 36 years old and still don't have great access. And if I waited to teach them how to, they wouldn't be reading.
Right.
But
I think that goes to, we decided that that being able to track the data is the most important thing. And so if the access isn't reliable, then we can't test the knowledge. And so
it depends on what the knowledge is you're testing.
Well, I know, but I'm thinking about the programs now that come out that their only way, their fidelity is embedded in the scripted instruction, and how far that is from what you're talking about. And does that mean that are we, again, I think it means that we're possibly focusing on the wrong thing. We're focusing on the data. We're focusing on and by the way, sometimes some of these programs are amazing if you're allowed to not do the script.
If you're allowed to teach and then use it as a practice tool, use it as the test. But it can't be the instructor. You went to school. You have a master's degree in theory because you liked teaching kids. And you've become managers of people.
Right.
You know, like when I said I started, I had 8 kids, you know, most of them needing lots of support. I had
Full
one
assist. Yeah.
One aide, me and a lovely woman. That's it. We did all the bathrooming, toothbrushing, you know, lunch, feeding, and teaching, right? And developing the content, because in 1984 there wasn't content.
Right.
Anything, you know, you just taught you needed to teach, right? So I tried to develop all those things, and it was me and her. I didn't manage her much. It was just me and her, right? We did the kids, right? Now you've got, you know, 10 kids and 8 aides, and you spend more time managing the adults because those people are teaching the kids. You're not teaching the kids. And this is just for me personally, it's probably a good reason why I'm not a classroom teacher today, that I couldn't do it. I wouldn't allow it. I can't allow someone else to do something and me not know what you're doing. I'm not going to take responsibility for it. And I have responsibility for it. If I'm a classroom teacher, I have responsibility for every single thing that happens in that classroom, including when the speech pathologist comes in or the PT comes in. I want to know what you're doing. And what are you doing when you take them out? What are you working on? Because I'll work on that when you're gone.
Right.
I can't do that if I have to manage 9 other people, and they're the ones teaching the kids, and they're the ones deciding if the kids should move on, or they're the ones and it's like, but they didn't go to school to be a teacher. I did. And that's not how I want to spend my day. I want to spend my day with those kids, figuring out what they need and making those decisions, because that's what I'm good at. And so that's a real hard dynamic today when I come in to consult in classrooms, or I come in to help out in a classroom, to try to, you're almost trying to teach the aide how to be the teacher, you know, and it's like, some of them are great. I'm not saying that they're not, you know, but well-intentioned, and they're not, but I look at the teacher who is at her desk or managing the one kid that's the behavioral kid.
Right. So what messages do you have for the teacher in that type of situation? You're coming to consult in the classroom, how to best use that paraeducator support, or what do you do?
Well, of course, it depends a bit on the kid and a bit on the circumstances, but I really do try to, one, I always speak to the teacher, like, you're here and this is what we're doing, because you have a responsibility to know. And then you have the responsibility. You should be the one saying, okay, paraeducator, move on to lesson 2 or whatever, you know, move here now. If they're the inclusion where they're out and then they're bringing the kid back, and all the decisions and stuff happen in classroom by the paraeducator because you're not with them, then it's the teacher and the other teacher that need to have a conversation, and then message delivered to the paraeducator. And it isn't about a hierarchy. I'm not trying to keep anybody down, but if you don't know, there are things in theory that you ought to be able to intervene and go, that's not a great learning style for my student. So let's create this activity or this set of materials that should help support that, so that you can keep going paraeducator in that classroom. But that's the background that I should be able to look at and go, you know what, this kid doesn't learn the best that way. And just holding up a piece of paper that's and you reading it to them may not be the best
Mm-hmm.
method. So let's take that and let's break that out into sentence strips, or let's break that out into, cards, or let's put that on a whiteboard with with this around it, or let's create that in some technology that they can come back here and re-listen and re-listen and re-listen. But if I don't know what's happening, then I can't do those interventions very easily, and I can't support that. And then you're going to have not great success. It's kind of a, and then we start looking at, well, see, inclusion doesn't work. And, and it's like, well, it doesn't work. There's lots of reasons why it doesn't work. I mean,
well, one of the things I appreciate you is that so many things, Michele, in all of our sidebar conversations, but one of the things I appreciate about you is kind of your bravery in they might be not a behavior problem, and may have trained them to be passive learners and cooperate and maybe follow directions, and you'll call that out and be like, but that's not reading, but that's not actually what the end game here. The end game isn't behavior. It really isn't. And the end game isn't compliance.
Yeah.
And what are we even measuring when we've gotten that? I think you have a story about this where they're moving along with their reading goals, and so on paper it kind of looks like they can read because they're getting these 8 out of 10 things because they're being compliant and they're touching the right thing and all this stuff. But you're finding, actually, I'm gonna say the unpopular thing right now, and that is that we're not focusing on the things that matter, or we're not measuring what's functional. Talk to us a little bit about the bravery that it is to go stop, even if it's working, and I'm air quoting that because what is working, right? Talk to us a little bit about how you just do that consistently in your career, and not even as a classroom teacher anymore. Even when you put your kid in a power wheelchair, it's like they can go straight. Is that the goal? How often do any of us even walk straight? Like, as you kind of call it and go, this is not the end game here. So talk to us about that mindset, because I feel like there's toxic mindsets, there's systematic hangups, there's limitations to the paperwork, and we lose what matters. And then sometimes that means you have to say the hard, brave thing, which is, we're not focusing on what matters.
Well, I'm often unpopular. That is very true. Well, I don't, it's interesting. I don't think of it as brave. I guess I'm
honest.
I feel like, okay, yeah, brutally, painfully honest. I guess when I look at kids, when I meet a child, for whatever role I'm in, if it's classroom kind of stuff, if it's communication, if it's power mobility, if whatever it is, when I meet them, I'm not exactly looking at them today. I'm looking at them in a year or where do I want you in 5 years from now? Where do I think that is? I don't know the path through the forest if I haven't been to the other side of the forest yet.
Right.
I don't know where I'm going if I don't have sort of a picture of that there. Now, that is a bit of like, I'm predicting the future, and I'm not, I may be successful, I may not, but I can't create a path if I don't have an end in mind. Even if midway down the path I go, ooh, not the end, the end's over here. Well, that's okay, then I'll make it over there. But I don't have a path if I don't sort of see kind of where I want them to be. And so, I had a student, and I think Brenda, it's the one you're talking about, but I had a student, Phil, and he is the 36-year-old who still has really crappy access to this day. He hit a switch to save his life if you're watching. Now, if he's alone in his room, he's amazing, but he gets in front of anybody and there's just too much pressure, and he can't do it. And yeah, he was tootling along through school, and they said he was 9 years old and he read at a 4th grade level. And he had, they gave him, because he was a terrible scanner, he was a single switch scanner, he was terrible at it, and they gave him 4 locations. Everything was presented in a group of 4, and he had an ETRAN, an eye gaze frame, and he had 4 locations, and they'd put up the word, 4 words, and then, CVC words, and then the picture. So they're all nouns, and they put up the picture of the bus, and then he's supposed to look right at the bus. And
at his 4 choices. Yeah.
4 choices. And he'd look, and then the teacher would go, "Is that the one you wanted?" And he'd go, and they'd go, "Phil, okay, be serious. This is bus. Which word is bus?" And so now that's eliminated. And then he'd look at this one, and he'd look at it, and he'd put his eyes up, and he'd just hold. And eyes up was yes, not eyes up ever, by the way, but eyes up was yes, and he'd just stare up at the ceiling. And then they'd go, "Phil, be serious. Come on, really. Which one is it?" Okay, now those are out, and he's down to 50-50 down here, and he would get it, and they would go, "Thank you." And because everyone knew that he was very, very smart, and he is. He's incredibly bright. And everybody, he had a very funny sense of humor. He was super sarcastic, and they all believed that he did know how to do these things, so they did so. Right. And he knew how to play the game enough to fake his way through, so nobody knew. And he came to me for access because he was a terrible scanner. And he came to me more and more and more, and he had a lot of other things, nobody could get him back in his chair except me. And, he had a lot of things. Anyway, he's spending more time with me. And I finally said, I said to him, 2 things to him. He's another one that really changed a lot of things for me. The first thing I said to him was, "I have worked with you now for 2 years, and we have written IEP goals about access. You're going to hit the switch within so many seconds with this much accuracy. And some days you're like 100%. Some minutes you're 100%, and other minutes you can't function, right?
Yeah.
You're consistently inconsistent. That's the description. Consistently. Right. And so I finally, but when he was a typical single switch scanner with really bad body, he either hit early or hit just after, right?
The timing.
One late or one early. So people did the blank square in the front because he overhit in the beginning, which just made another space for him to mishit in. I'm not a fan of those, but anyway, people did things like, it just, nothing really worked. And so finally, but he would scan, right? And he'd listen. And even if he would hit wrong, if it moved to the right one, he'd look up, and he could always look up correctly. But he couldn't hit correctly if it was his head or his hand or his elbow. I mean, we had him everywhere. But he could, if I said, "Don't, just tell me if I give you live voice scanning choices. Do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want this? That one?" "Okay, great. That's the one I went." And it was awesome at that. And I said, "Okay, I'm done. I'm done talking about how bad you are at this. I'm done sitting in an IEP and telling everyone that you're inconsistent, that sometimes you're great and sometimes you're not. I'm done trying to explain why I still think you are super smart, and that this doesn't represent you. I'm finished. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of talking about it." And he was like, "Yes, yes, yes." So from this moment forward, we're not writing any more access goals ever again. I won't write one for you. Someone else can, but I'm not writing them. I will be your switch. Done. I'm done. Give me the switch. I ripped the Velcro off his tray, and I held it, and I said, "Here we go. Let's go. Let's do your activity. You eyes up when you hear the one you want. I'll hit the switch." And so he was just like, and he was all excited, and his eyes were, and I said, "All right, well, calm yourself down, because here we go. Start working. And this is how we're going to start working. So no more access. We're done. I'm your switch. I'm done talking about it. We're going to figure out something else. We are going to continue teaching you how to read and how to write and how to spell and how to talk and how to, social studies and all the things that you need to learn, because this is a problem.
We're not going to wait.
Task 4.
And if he's 36 and still not consistent, then he would have never received instruction if we'd waited to master access.
We waited, right?
Yeah.
So once we started doing that, he would make his choices, and then I said to him, and he'd do the same thing. He'd do his eyes up to the ceiling and just stare. And I said, okay, you don't get to get mad at me. I don't think you can read. And he just stared at me, and I said, it's okay. I don't care that you can't read. In fact, if you could read, you don't need me. Like, if you knew everything, you and I wouldn't be hanging out. Like, it's my job to teach you how to do stuff. And I don't think you know how to read. Will you be truthful with just me? Will you tell me the truth? And he said, yes. And I said, do you know the sounds that the letters make? If I showed you this letter, do you know what sound it makes? Stared at the ceiling, and he just stared at it. And I said, Phil, I said, when you stare at the ceiling, I'm gonna say that's I don't know. It's not yes, it's not no, it's I don't know. When you look up and look back at me, that's yes. And so I just no. I said, so now when you stare at the ceiling, I'm going to say that's I don't know. So do you know what this letter is? And he stared at the ceiling. I said, you don't know. And then he said, yes. I said, okay. Do you know any of them? And he said, yes. And I said, do you know the letters of your name? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. And I said, do you know the names of the letters? No. And I said, okay. And I said, so let's you and I learn to read. I will teach you how to read. But you have to be truthful. You can't do the fake stuff that you've been doing out in the classroom. And he's like, yes. And so then came the hard conversation with mom and dad. And by the way, the teachers who've been reporting in every way he could read, that he couldn't, and that he's telling you he can't. And and his parents. So I had his mom and dad, or his dad was at school all the time because his dad brought him back and forth. So his dad came in, and I talked to his dad, and I said, so, and I had Phil was with us, and I said, can I share with your dad what you and I talked about today? He said, yeah. So I explained to dad, we're not doing the switch anymore. I'm tired. And his dad said, thank God. And I was like, and I said, and the second thing is, which, I fear maybe not be as good of news, but Phil can't read, let alone at a 4th grade level. And he goes, yeah, we know.
Oh, wow.
Like,
yeah.
He goes, and I said, so he and I are going to start over, and I'm going to do my best to teach him how to read. I don't know how far we'll get. I don't know how good I'm going to be at it. I don't know, but what we're doing that's just fake. So let's do something at least maybe it's real. And his dad's like, yes, please. Thank you very much. Please, please, please. And I said, okay. And so then he went home, and then his mom called me that night at my house, called me and said, we've been waiting for somebody to figure it out. And I'm like, wow. Wish you didn't have to wait, or wish you didn't feel like you had to wait. I'm glad we know. And she's like, no, go for it. So then I had to have the meeting with the teachers. So I had the meeting with the teachers after I'd already talked to parents, because I knew that the parents were in support of it. And so then I talked to the teachers, and they were like, well, fine, then you figure it out. I mean, it wasn't real happy. They weren't, I didn't win friends at that moment. And it was a small school. So we were, there weren't a lot of us. And so, that I didn't go over super big, but they also, I think, were relieved to not have to figure it out, because he's hard. I mean, and again, access seemed to gate everything. Everything presented through technology. And because his access was so bad, then we went to this E-Tran, and we were pretty sure he knew, because he's so smart. He had such a high receptive vocabulary, was off the charts, and absolutely at grade level, if not above. You could read him anything and ask him questions, and he completely understood it. It was the expressive piece and the actual decoding of reading that it was just, he couldn't do. So.
But I just want to interject something here, because it brings me back to a couple conversations we've had so far in this series. And one of them is almost like, and I hate to say it because I know it's a catchphrase, but there is some, I don't know what the phrase would be, but discernment around presuming competence. They're presuming, since his receptive language is so high, they're presuming that he's playing with them and he's not looking at the right word. They're presuming competence to a level of detriment, in that I'm not going to teach you because you know this, and you're pulling my leg. Where your approach was, I'm presuming potential to read here. And that's why he could be honest. Right. So you're not presuming inability.
No.
You're presuming, I think you have potential to learn this. And by the way, I'm hoping I have potential to teach this to you, right? Because the onus is actually on me.
I told him, I said, I don't know how far we're going to get.
It's not even on you. Yeah.
But
and so it's like, that is where I feel like there is an important distinction between presuming competency to a detriment level and presuming potential, which makes everybody stand up to the problem solving plate.
Oh, so I think part of the issue a little bit about presuming competence is also I can't tell you how many people read a story, ask questions, and call that reading. Now, it's part of reading. It's listening comprehension. It's not reading comprehension.
Right.
And it's not reading. It's not decoding.
Right.
And so because he was so high in these other things, and because he could show a picture and ask a question, and he could look at that picture and make sense of it, and draw inferences, and he could do those things, that there was this, it's just like, it was almost like they opted for sight words rather than decoding. And the sight words didn't exactly work for him, but he could fake his way through it. Right.
It kind of masked all the other.
Because he was funny, and because he kidded, and he, and he did that stuff. They all were like, come on, be serious. And then meanwhile, he's just like, not that one, not that one, not that one. And because it was only a field of 4.
And because we don't know how to do.
And half the time he hit it on the second one.
Right.
It wasn't that he had to eliminate all of them to get to it. A lot of times he got it the first time. Yay. Yeah. Like, good job, Phil. And then they'd move on, and it'd be like, that was pure luck. It's like.
Right. And we don't know how to do that decoding and phonics with kids who are non-speaking.
It's a really hard thing to sort of say, okay, you're a non-speaking kid, and I'm going to show you the letter M, and I'm going to make the sound. And then somehow I need you to integrate that into your brain of how that feels and how that word feels. And, and where you sequence it. And if it's, mat and it's at, like, what we began to see. So he learned the sounds and he learned the letters very quickly, which I wasn't surprised. He's super smart. It's just,
and he's had some years of experience in that.
Right. Yeah. And no one really broke it down.
Yeah.
So we learned those things. And then when we started spelling, what I was able to figure out with him, and I used to, which I think is really valuable, and I don't think enough people do it, but I literally would record my sessions with him, and I would go back and go, I asked him this, he said this. I asked him this, he said this. I confirmed, did you mean this? He said no. I said, oh, did you mean this then? Yes, I meant that. Right. And I could look through all the times that I thought this was what his answer was, but he couldn't. And I could begin to, when we started spelling and writing, he would put letters out, and I would say, okay, listen in your head, listen to the word in your head. What's the first sound you hear? Right. And then he'd say, he'd do things like, it's an A, and then I would say, is it an A, or an ah? Because it could be any of those sounds. And depending on what that sound was, dictated to some degree what the possible next letter might be, right? If it's ah, it isn't going to be a B, right? It's like, typically it's going to be a short sound. So, I could help him, begin to figure those things out. But so we would go through that process, and through that process, I began, and you will see where he hears and isn't hearing. And what was very evident was that he could get the first sound and the last sound, but the middle sounds were just a mush, which makes sense. And vowels were really hard. Right. Because vowels really hard. Not unusual for anybody, but then I could gear my instruction to match it. But if I just was like constantly holding up flashcards going, which word's this and which word's that, I'm never going to know those things about it.
You're making it
shows how to write. I'm never going to know those things because he can only pick for the words I give him and he had a receptive vocabulary that was giant,
Right.
right? That was never going to be enough for him. So
Right.
I wanted him to spell if he could, right? And
Right.
so we kind of went down that path. And so we changed everything. We changed what his communication system was set up like. It had pages of 4. I threw all that out. We have, he has an it's an accent basically as a PRC system. And he has still the same spelling boards he had when I made. So he has manual spelling boards. He has a notebook full of stories that his parents continue to write with him about places he goes and people he meets and funny things that happen and things that he wants them to put in the book. And sometimes they're just phrases that he thinks are funny and then he goes to a movie and he thinks it's a funny phrase and says, parents, write it down. He has amazing family support with all of that, but he uses all those things to talk from.
Not just one thing, right? How does he access that accent?
With 2 switches at his head.
Okay.
He has a power chair.
What I'm thinking about, Michele, though, is so much of what you're saying reminds me of things that where I would describe my role as winging it. Meaning I didn't read a book on it. Nobody went to class about this. I mean, if I didn't go to class to learn how to this, I know you didn't go to class to learn how to this. So it's like the super hard part at the beginning of learning a new skill. And by the way, that still happens to me, right? I'm still learning a new skill and I'm fumbling through it and I'm mad at myself because it took me 6 months to teach something because it took me 5.5 months to figure out the way this kid learns. And then when I go to mentor someone in this and they're like, what's the answer? Just tell me the answer. And
what do I do?
And when I think about mentorship and leaders and change makers in this whole series, what every single one of you talk about is like, and we didn't know anything then. So I just tried stuff. And all the things that we learned from all of the brave people that didn't know anything. So they just went ahead and tried all the things. And that is how we advanced the field forward because there was no book on this. And by the way, even though now there are books on this, it's still on the technology and it's still on a principle and it's still not individual. It can't be. There's no book, no resource that's going to be out there that's going to be as individual as what is required for teaching these complex kids. So what is I think about switch access and all of the things that you've contributed to the field of switch access. MinSpeak. I mean, the crazy detail in which you have reformed all of that. I was in awe one time in a class with you, and I don't even want to know the 50 hours a week outside of work that you put into that, and for how many years you probably did that. So, and people don't even know, right? Because now devices show up with 2-step scanning with auditory preview and frequency and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how did that ever happen? Somebody sat down and goes, let's make the switch stuff easier. And what about frequency? And what about this? And let's try it. And then it fails. And what if we do this? And what if we do quadrants? And what if we do it? Right. And so what is the best way as you counsel people now? Because I come to you. I know that, and it's like, how do you counsel people without giving them the answer because they need to go through the problem solving?
Well, so I think all the books and all the research and all the wonderful stuff out there, Karen Erickson and everybody that's done all these wonderful things. The point still is, though, that the actual task of reading isn't different. Right? It's still decoding. It's still a B and it makes a B, and whatever's next to it sometimes has to do with what's in front of it and what's after it. And there's all those things, right? And so the task of reading, the task of writing, the task of speaking, that has never changed, regardless of what we know. It is still the same as it was 40 whatever years ago when I started, right? So while we have new strategies and new things to lay on top and attempt, right? We have making words, and we have all these wonderful, ways to present stuff. We are still doing the same thing. It is still this letter, this sound, and this sound, right? And then together they make this whole sound. It's
the foundation. Yeah.
Right. Talking is still now, and this might be where I differ a little bit, but communication is for me about a relationship. That's its primary job. That's its singular function for me. When I approach a kid, it's about you and me, and you and me understanding each other.
Yes.
It's not about complete sentences. It's not about punctuation. It's not about all the little words. It's not about any of
I don't know what you're going to say.
It's not about the words in the right order. It's, I don't care. I don't care if it's a word here and a look over there, and an elbow bump, and then I'm staring at you, and I'm supposed to be, you wanted me, what? Because it's behind you in your backpack, and it's, you went to the, however we get there.
Accepting all forms of communication and telling you something you don't already know.
You and me, and I understand you.
Yeah.
Right. And then my job is to figure that out. You and me have to get that down. So me and Phil had to get it down.
Yeah.
This
is yes. This is no. This is I don't know. We cool?
This is gonna be I don't know. We're gonna have these rules, and I did create rules for him, and I gave him 2 pronouns in the first set of. He had 40 words, and I gave him 2 pronouns, I and you meant anyone else, and I meant him, and that was the rule. If you pick I, it's about you. If you pick you, it's not necessarily about me. It's about me or anyone else, and I will ask you, because I'm not going to give you all those pronouns taking up that valuable space because we're doing 40, right? And so we made these rules, and we made this whole process so that he and I could talk. And then my job was to take all of that mishmashy, messy stuff and try to put it into something. And for him, it was layers of things that someone else could use. And he was in charge of which of those layers he used with any one person at any given time, because he's the only one that knows what it's like to sit in his body. He's the only one that knows, I can't hit a switch right now. All I can do is yes or no.
Yeah.
He's the only one that knows if he thinks that person can give him live voice scanning choices and ever give him a choice that he actually wants. He makes those evaluations and those judgments. It's you're the one, right? It's not I want you to do it this way. And I get frustrated when I hear people say, you should have said it with your talker. I'm gonna pretend like I didn't understand you. With your talker. No, I understood that. And let's get deeper, and you can tell me with your talker. Right. But I understood that. I'm not going to invalidate whatever it is. I don't care what it is.
I think the perception is that if it's hard if it's hard, then I must be doing it wrong. If it's not traditional, then I must not be holding them to the higher standard. And again, we're still measuring the wrong thing. If it's hard, it's because it's hard. Because decoding's hard, by the way.
It's hard. All of it's hard.
All of it's hard. So it's communication.
It's hard, period. So if you didn't sign up for hard work, you signed up for the wrong kids.
Right. Right.
They're hard.
And then that you're, we will say total communication, right? We throw that out as SLPs. Oh, we accept total communication. And then we're like, no, he didn't say I want before that. It was like, why else did he bring up watermelon when you have a plate of it, right? So we don't. It's like we've decided to if a verbal child said watermelon, would we make them say I want watermelon? That's what I'm always coming back to too. Would we make a verbal kid do it a different way, or would we accept the gesture? We'd accept all this stuff. So I think the other thing is that people expect it to be easier. If I must be doing it wrong if it's hard. And that's just not true. If it's hard, then you're right on track. Yeah. Right. And if you haven't mastered anything in 2 years, you're also right on track.
Right. And we don't need people to prove.
If you got a little bit, right? Like somebody I just went and saw somebody up in the Seattle area, in fact. And she's working with a very hard kid, like a Phil, a very, very hard kid. And we talked about some stuff, and we had another friend of mine who is in a chair and is in non-speaking and has lots of tone, but drives a power chair. And she came in to meet her. And then they're not really doing a lot of communication. They're still trying to figure things out, and her access is like really complicated and really hard and not ideal, not really where we really want it to be. Like she points with her foot, and that's not going to be long term probably the best choice, but it's what she does at the moment. And we're trying to shape that into some other things. But my friend came in and met her family, and then I suggested that that they do some choices with her, and she could text my friend Drew. And that Drew was really good about responding right back, and then I looked at Drew, and she's like, yeah, she'd do it. And I'm like, okay, so maybe that's a good activity for her because she's excited, and because trying to find real activities and not these ones, and for free and all that stuff,
meaningful,
like
age respectful.
Get a flip, get whatever wherever the words are, and start asking her to put some together and let her just. So I get this email literally like the next day, because she went back and saw her the next day, and proceeded to text message Drew. And I got this email that was it was perfect. And it's like this big, right? But she chose 4 words out of her flip book. She just let her pick 4 words. And then I said to her, I said, you can ask her if she wants to, take 1 word and make it a sentence, or are all these words one thought, and figure that stuff out. And then ask her, want to send it just like you, or do you want me to help you edit it so that it's in, some different form?
Love those questions.
Chose these 4 words, and it was like 3 words and a phrase. And the words were funny, silly, love, I like it. Right. And when she asked her, do you want me to help you with funny, silly, to put those into a sentence or something that because we were laughing, and there were some moments that were very funny, and we were all laughing, and the little girl said, no.
Send it as is.
Yeah. And I'm like, this is exactly that little moment that you just had with her is what I live for. Like I'll work all year for that moment, right? And everything that I've done to get to that moment, I don't care how long it took, was worth it, because that is the most genuine, real moment that you've had with her, and that she's having with Drew, and that you helped her have. Right. And that will change how you two go from here forward. If you hold on to some of those little do you want, because who doesn't know what funny, silly, love, I like it meant? Yeah. We all and Drew knew what that meant.
It's just like your interaction with that student who was going to sit down and said 5 more minutes. That was your moment to then scaffold and
that's fine.
Go forward together.
Right. And so it's those moments that I read it and was like goosebumpy, like that's everything for me. I live for those moments. And if I can walk away, and if I had to spend 6 months to get there, it's worth it. That 6 months was worth it, because guess what? If I never got there, that moment is real, right? And the rest of the stuff, if you never ever have anything real, I don't know why we're doing it.
Yeah, if you never get there, what's the point of any of it?
I can get on a call with Phil, and I can talk to him through the computer, because I know his alphabet board that he uses, because I made it. I remember what the 40 words are. I know when he looks behind him that there's something in his book, and I can yell through the thing and say, Dad, get the book out. He wants something. And he can talk to me to this day, because we know those things. He and I set those up. Those are real, and he knows that I know them. Therefore, he'll use them. He doesn't use people that he doesn't think knows them. Right. And so those are real moments that allow him. And I used to get criticized, and always, I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, he only does it with you, so it doesn't count. He only does it with you. Well, he doesn't do it with me. I don't know that he knows his letters. I don't care if you don't know that he knows his letters. I know he knows his letters. So stop testing him on his letters and move on.
and have some of those authentic moments that we're having, which is why we're doing
Rely on that. Build that rapport with him.
Yeah.
Let him know that you get it, that you get him, and he can trust you, and you can move on, and you'll see that he knows his. But no, we make them reprove every time they get a new teacher or a new SLP. Well, I don't know that he knows all the verbs. We're going to go back and we're going to work on verbs. But he's already worked on verbs for 3 years. Well,
Right.
but not with me. Well, so does the 5th grade teacher redo the 4th grade curriculum every year? She trusts that the 4th grade teacher taught in 4th grade and that they're ready for 5th grade. They don't go back and do 4th grade again, because I never saw them do the missions in California. You know, it's like, that's not what happens. But we in special ed seem to think that we have to make our kids reprove themselves over and over and over. And it's not fair. And it already takes long. And if we do that, we're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah. So, Michele, I feel like we could go on with you for so much longer. You have so many amazing stories, and so many stories about students, because you are student focused, student centered, and you've made impact in our field. You've made impact with students that really shows with these stories that are personal. You know about them. You're not just there to show up and then leave. And it's all about that authentic communication and that authentic work you're talking about. And I just so appreciate you sharing this. But before we wrap up, we wanted to ask, what is something people might not know about you that you want to share? Maybe you have a special project you're working on or some interest area. And it's a tricky question.
I like Legos. My dream job was to be a master Lego builder.
Really?
That would be the best job ever.
For those listening in, she has a whole Hogwarts Lego set behind her.
Yes, and over there I have the Millennium Falcon. So, yeah.
Okay.
But she's actually a very good artist. And people don't know that about you.
I am a painter. I do paint and draw, and yeah.
And you paint canvas, and you paint shoes. And
I do.
Shoes.
I did paint some shoes. I painted some Converse high tops for my friend with her dogs, one dog on each side. So, and I painted hair for my niece that with her university and her sorority. So the university on one side and the logo of the university, and then her sorority on the other side. And
how fun.
Yeah, artsy fartsy. You know, you have to get out of the very, I don't know. I'm a Virgo, so I'm very linear. I like things, you know, alphabetical and A and then B and then C. And so I break things down, which might be why it's easy for me to break skills down. I just want to, we're going to take this down, and we're going to start here, and then we're going to go here. And I'm very that kind of a thinker. And so art and painting and things like that are not. There's nothing linear. So, I mean, I do think that, you know, communication devices and figuring those things out for me is creative. I do feel like that I have to be really creative, and I have to really think outside the box, even though I'm linear, but I think outside the box and figure out how to like incorporate and make all those things that for Philip work together. But it's a very different creative outlet than painting and you know, and things like that. And so yeah, I just go down and turn on a lot of music really loud, and in many cases just throw paint at the canvas, which it lands wherever, which there's a part of me that's like, and then there's a part of me that's like, oh, I like it. You know,
that sounds fun.
That's like very Chihui.
I tried to fling it right there, but it didn't go there. And then I was like, darn. And then I was like, oh, but I like it over there better. So yeah, so it's good.
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes. Wonderful conversation.
Love talking to you. I learned something every time. Thank you.
You're welcome.